That cold and busy afternoon in the city of Bridgetown, the McDonald's on the corner of Main Street and Central Avenue kept up its frenetic pace. It was one of those places where time always seemed to be against you, and every order had to be executed with precision. Sarah Evans, the young and ambitious assistant manager, moved through the restaurant with the agility of someone who understood the weight of her responsibilities. She had fought hard for that position and had no intention of letting anything or anyone hinder her rise. As she adjusted the order display and checked the numbers, Sarah noticed an older man entering through the glass door. His clothes were worn, and the winter cold was reflected in his hunched and trembling body. He looked around the restaurant as if he didn't belong there and hesitated as he approached the counter. Sam Harris's eyes met Sarah's for a brief moment, and something changed right then. Without thinking twice, Sarah walked up to the register, ordered a burger, and handed it to the man. Sam looked surprised, but his eyes conveyed a gratitude that words couldn't express. He accepted the meal with trembling hands, offering a restrained smile. "Thank you, miss. I really needed this." Sarah smiled back, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. But that moment didn't last. As soon as Megan Roberts, the manager, realized what had happened, her firm steps echoed through the restaurant. Her eyes were fixed on Sarah, and it only took a second for her to realize that her action would have consequences. "Sarah, can we talk in the office?" Megan said, her voice firm but controlled. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Megan was known for her strict adherence to the rules, and in that company, nothing was more important than regulations. The look of disapproval on her boss's face left no room for doubt. This wouldn't end well. In the small back office, Megan closed the door with a sharp motion. The silence between the two was almost suffocating as Sarah tried to guess what would come next. "Do you know what you did?" Megan began, crossing her arms. "I just bought him a burger." "The man looked hungry," Sarah replied, her voice trying to stay firm, but a slight hesitation was evident. "And you think that's your responsibility?" Megan's voice grew harsher now. "The rules are here for a reason. It's not your job to feed people who don't pay. Do you realize how much this is going to cost us? We can't start giving out food to everyone who looks like they need it." Sarah felt the weight of those words. She knew Megan was being tough, but something about it bothered her, something that couldn't be measured just by company rules. "I just thought," Sarah began, but Megan cut her off with a gesture. "It's not your job to think about that. Your job is to follow the rules. And since you broke a clear rule, I have no choice but to fire you." Megan's words landed like a heavy sentence. Sarah felt the ground fall out from under her. In an instant, everything she had built seemed to collapse. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Fired for an act of kindness? It was as if the world around her was spinning too fast, and she didn't know how to slow it down. "Please, Megan," Sarah tried to argue, but her boss's gaze was unyielding. "My hands are tied, Sarah. This is a business, and here, rules have to be followed. I'm sorry, but that's just how things work." And with that, Sarah was officially dismissed. She left the office with her mind reeling, while the other employees cast curious glances in her direction. She grabbed her bag and walked out of the restaurant with a heavy heart, not saying a word. The cold wind of Bridgetown seemed even sharper when she stepped onto the street, her hands trembling, not just from the cold, but from the whirlwind of emotions overwhelming her. As she wandered aimlessly down the sidewalk, the sense of injustice and frustration grew inside her. Sarah had followed the rules for so long, always putting work above everything else. But in that moment, a simple decision to follow her heart had cost her her job. She wondered if she had made the wrong choice or if, perhaps, there was something she had been ignoring for a long time. What really mattered in life. Without a clear direction, she ended up in Central Square, where she sat on one of the benches, watching people rush by. The sounds of the city filled the space around her, but in her mind, everything seemed quiet, except for the questions echoing incessantly. Had she lost her sense of empathy by blindly following the rules all these years? Or was this the first time she had finally listened to her own humanity? As she reflected, she heard soft footsteps beside her. She looked up, and to her surprise, there was Sam, the man she had helped. He walked slowly toward her, still holding the burger wrapper as if it were something precious. "I didn't mean to bother you," he said in a low, hesitant voice. "But I felt I should thank you again." Sarah didn't know what to say as she saw Sam standing there, still holding the burger like it was a precious gift. She had expected to feel bitter, frustrated by losing her job, but in that moment, looking at the man she had helped, she realized something inside her was quietly rearranging. Maybe not everything was lost. "You don't need to thank me," Sarah said, her voice softer than she expected. Sam smiled, a fragile but genuine smile. "It's not just for the burger," he said, sitting down next to Sarah on the bench. "It's for the gesture. In the world we live in, kindness like that is rare. You gave me more than food today. You gave me hope." Sarah looked at the horizon of the square. The bustle of the city continued around them, as if nothing special had happened that day. But for her and Sam, that moment was significant. A small pause in the rush of life. "I think you're right. Kindness is rare," Sarah said, still deep in thought. "But sometimes its consequences are bigger than we expect." She looked at her hands, the afternoon chill seeping into her skin. Fired. The words still reverberated in her mind. Everything she had built at work, the effort to follow the rules, the dedication to being seen as efficient and competent, seemed to have crumbled in a matter of minutes. "I was fired for helping you," Sarah suddenly confessed, unable to hold it in any longer. It was as if saying it out loud would help her process what had happened. Sam looked at her, his face reflecting surprise and sadness. "I'm sorry, miss. That wasn't my intention. I never meant to cause any trouble." Sarah shook her head, dismissing the guilt Sam was trying to carry. "It wasn't your fault. I made a choice. I did what I thought was right, but it seems like doing the right thing doesn't always lead to a good place." The silence between them lingered a little longer until Sam sighed, his voice taking on a deeper, more reflective tone. "I've lived long enough to know that sometimes what seems like an immediate loss can be the seed of something much bigger. When you lose something, it doesn't mean you've lost everything. What matters is what you do from here." Sam's words echoed in Sarah's mind, but it was still hard to see beyond the cloud of frustration hanging over her. However, something in his tone and the calmness with which he spoke seemed to have a soothing effect. "So what do I do now?" Sarah asked, as if the question was directed as much at herself as at Sam. She had always had a plan, a clear path to follow, but now everything felt undefined. What would come next? Sam shrugged lightly, but his gaze was wise. "I don't know exactly, but you've already started something today, by helping me. Maybe if you keep following that direction, you'll find the answers." The cold afternoon wind seemed to play with the leaves around the square as Sarah processed those words. For the first time in a long while, she was outside her comfort zone, unsure of the next step. And at the same time, there was a peculiar freedom in that uncertainty. As the minutes passed, Sarah began to tell Sam about her life, her efforts to climb the career ladder, the choices she made to be seen as an exemplary employee. She talked about the pressure to be efficient, to never make mistakes, the weight she had always carried, trying to be perfect, but which now seemed almost unbearable. Sam listened with patience, like a teacher listening to a lost student, without judgment, only with the desire to help. When Sarah finished, she felt lighter, as if by speaking she could finally see her own doubts more clearly. "You know, Sarah, in my life I've seen many people fight to follow the rules and fit in. But it takes courage to look beyond them and understand that sometimes the rules don't cover all human situations. Sometimes we have to listen to our hearts," Sam said, his voice low but firm. "And it seems that today you listened to yours." Sarah smiled slightly, still trying to process what that meant for her. Since she was a child, she had been taught to be disciplined, to follow clear paths. And there she was, in a crucial moment, where her decision to act with compassion had changed her life. For better or worse, she still didn't know for sure. "I just hope this has some greater meaning, that it leads to something good," Sarah confessed, still uncertain about what the future held for her. Sam looked at her with tenderness and, before getting up, briefly held her hand, conveying a comfort that words couldn't express. "I believe you'll find your way, Sarah. Sometimes losing something that seemed important is what opens up space to find something that truly matters." He stood up, and before walking away, left one final reflection. Remember, it's not what we lose that defines who we are, but what we choose to do afterward. Sarah watched as Sam slowly walked away through the square, his steps slow and careful. It left her with a strange feeling, a mix of hope and insecurity. But one thing was certain. She was no longer in the same place she had been when the day started. Something had changed, something deep inside her. She took a deep breath and looked around. The day was beginning to darken, and the lights of Bridgetown were starting to illuminate the streets as passers-by continued with their errands. Sarah didn't know what would come next, but Sam's words echoed in her mind, as if reminding her that there was still a path ahead. She just needed the courage to follow it, even if it was uncertain. When Sarah got home that night, the weight of a new and uncertain reality pressed down on her. Her small, neat apartment felt empty, echoing the thoughts that tormented her. She dropped her bag on the kitchen table and collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She looked around, the familiar surroundings now strangely distant. The silence that usually brought peace after a long workday felt suffocating. She picked up her phone, hesitating before dialing her older brother Mark's number. Even though she knew he would always listen without judgment, Sarah didn't want. But in that moment, she had nowhere else to turn. Mark answered on the third ring, his warm, laid-back voice coming through the line. "Hey sis, how's it going?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "I had a rough day," she began, her voice low but loaded with emotion. "What happened?" Mark asked, concern quickly creeping into his tone. "I got fired," Sarah said in one breath, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders now that she'd finally said it out loud. There was a brief pause on the other end, as if Mark was processing the news. "What? How? You're the best employee they have. Why would they do that?" Sarah sighed and explained everything that had happened, from the moment she decided to buy a burger for Sam to Megan's final decision to fire her. When she finished, she felt drained but also relieved to have shared the story with someone who understood her. "That's insane," Mark said, incredulous. "You did what any decent person would do. How is that a reason to fire you?" "The rules, Mark. It's always about the rules. Megan's always been strict, and I knew there'd be consequences, but I didn't think it would be this extreme," Sarah replied, feeling torn between frustration and understanding that corporate decisions don't always make sense. Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. "And do you really want to keep working for a place that punishes people for being human? What kind of job is that?" Sarah stayed quiet for a moment. Her brother's question echoed her own thoughts. For years, she had believed that following the rules and working hard would be the path to success. But now, staring at the emptiness of her apartment, she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. "I don't know, Mark. Everything feels so confusing right now. I've always wanted to succeed, to be respected, but now I'm not sure if that's the right path. I've always told you." Mark's voice was calm and understanding. "The corporate world isn't for everyone. You're great at what you do, Sarah, but you're also human, and that humanity is what makes you special. Don't let a system that doesn't value that break you." Tears began to well up in Sarah's eyes, not so much because of the job loss, but because of the feeling that she had betrayed herself by trying to be something she perhaps was never meant to be. "So, what do I do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "First, breathe," Mark replied, his tone light and reassuring as always. "Then, think about what makes you happy. Not what people expect from you, but what you truly want." Mark's words struck a chord inside Sarah. She knew she needed time to process everything that had happened, but the truth was that being fired had forced her to confront a much bigger question. What did she really want from life? "I'll come by tomorrow morning," Mark announced, shifting the conversation in his usual easygoing way. "I'll bring coffee and we can talk. Maybe we can come up with a plan together." "Thanks, Mark. I'd love that," Sarah replied, a small spark of hope finding its way into her voice. She knew her brother always had a way of making things seem lighter, and right now, that was exactly what she needed. After hanging up, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She lay down on the couch, trying to relax, but her thoughts were still racing. The image of Sam, with his grateful smile and tired eyes, kept popping up in her mind. Did he know how much that small gesture had changed her life? And more importantly, what would she do now? Her eyes began to close, the weight of the day finally taking over. Before she could think of anything else, sleep overtook her. The next morning, the faint winter sun of Bridgetown lit up the streets as the city slowly woke up to another cold day. Sarah was roused by a soft knock at the door. Still groggy, she got up and opened it to find her brother, Mark, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing a wide grin. "Brought the best coffee in town," he said, waving the cups like a prize. "Thanks, bro," Sarah replied, accepting one of the cups and taking a small sip. The warmth of the coffee instantly revived her. The two sat down at the kitchen table, and Sarah once again recounted everything that had happened the day before. Mark listened attentively, shaking his head in disbelief every now and then. "You know what I think?" Mark began after taking a long sip of his coffee. "This is an opportunity. It may not seem like it now, but getting fired from that place could be the best thing that ever happened to you." Sarah looked at him, confused. "How can losing my job be an opportunity?" Mark smiled serenely. "You've been chasing something that maybe wasn't what you truly wanted. Now, you have a chance to stop, breathe, and think about what really matters to you. What makes you happy, Sarah? What makes your heart race?" Mark's questions hung in the air, and Sarah realized she didn't have immediate answers. For so long, she'd focused on being the model employee, on following the rules, that she hadn't stopped to think about what she really wanted. But maybe now was her chance to find out. Sarah remained silent for a few moments, watching the steam rise from her coffee as Mark's words echoed in her mind. "What makes your heart race?" Such a simple question, yet it seemed loaded with complexity. She had spent so much time following other people's expectations that she never stopped to ask herself what she truly wanted. Mark, with his laid-back demeanor, sat casually in his chair, fiddling with his cup with a hint of impatience. He had always lived life more freely, driven by art and spontaneity. Sarah, on the other hand, had always followed a straight path, chasing stability, recognition, and the security that the corporate world promised. Now, with that path broken, she felt adrift. "You've always liked rules, Sarah," Mark commented with a gentle smile. "There's nothing wrong with that, but maybe it's time to try something different." Sarah gave a small smile in response. He was right. Her entire life had been built around following clear directions, setting goals, and chasing a target. But for the first time, she was allowing herself to think outside of that rigid system. The truth was, she had never had the courage to do something just for herself, without considering the consequences or others' expectations. I don't know where to start," she admitted, her eyes fixed on the coffee in her hands. "I always thought I knew what I wanted to do, but now that I'm out of that job, I feel lost." Mark leaned forward, placing his cup on the table. "I get it, sis. It happens. But what's making you feel this way? Is it the fear of the unknown or the need for a clear path?" Sarah pondered the question. It was a bit of both. She had always been afraid of the unknown, of the uncertainty of not having a plan, of not knowing what to expect. And now, the idea of walking a path she couldn't predict made her uneasy. "I think it's the fear of failing," Sarah confessed. "I spent so much time trying to be successful that, now that I'm out of the game, I feel like I've lost control." Mark chuckled softly. "Control is an illusion, Sarah. Nobody has control over anything. We just do the best we can with what we've got. And from what I can see, you've already done a lot." Sarah looked at her brother, trying to absorb his words. He had always had such a different perspective from hers, and in that moment it felt like he was offering invaluable advice. "You're still in control in a way," Mark continued, "because you still have the power to choose. Now, more than ever, you have the freedom to decide what you want to do next. And that, Sarah, is something powerful." Those words sparked something inside Sarah. She had always seen freedom as a threat, as something that took away the security of having a clear path to follow. But now, maybe for the first time, she was beginning to see freedom as an opportunity, a chance to redefine who she wanted to be, not just what the world expected of her. "Maybe you're right," she said, finally smiling for real. "Maybe this is an opportunity, not an end." Mark raised his cup as if to toast. There it is. That's my sister. They laughed together, and the lightheartedness between them made Sarah feel a little more hopeful. The weight on her chest was starting to lift, and though she still didn't know exactly what she would do next, she was beginning to believe that this wasn't the end of the world. In fact, it might just be the beginning of something new. Later that day, after Mark left, Sarah decided to go for a walk. Bridgetown was a peculiar city, with its narrow, bustling streets, old buildings mixed with modern ones, and the central square serving as a meeting point for both locals and visitors. The cold air and biting winter wind made her pull her coat tighter around her, but the walk seemed necessary. She needed a moment to clear her thoughts away from the confines of her apartment. As she passed shop windows and hurried people, something inside her began to stir, a small idea that was starting to take shape. And almost without realizing it, her steps led her back to the central square, where she had spoken with Sam the night before. She sat on the same bench as before and looked around. The square was slightly busy, with people walking quickly, others sitting on benches or at the cafe nearby. Children, bundled up in heavy winter clothes, ran around, laughing and playing in the cold, indifferent to the worries of the adult world. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the cold air. Sam had said something that now echoed in her mind. Losing something doesn't define who we are, but what we do afterward does. She didn't know why those words kept coming back to her, but she felt there was a deep truth in them, something she was still trying to understand. When she opened her eyes again, she could hardly believe what she saw. Sam was on the other side of the square, walking slowly, as if he had no particular destination. He looked frailer than the night before, and his steps were cautious, as if he might lose his balance at any moment. Without hesitating, Sarah stood up and walked toward him. "Sam," she called out as she approached him. The old veteran turned slowly, his face lighting up in a smile when he recognized her. "Sarah, it's good to see you again." "How are you?" she asked, genuinely concerned. Sam smiled softly, but there was something in his eyes that suggested a deep weariness. "Oh, I'm fine, dear. Just taking a walk. The cold doesn't agree with me like it used to, but I like to keep moving." They started walking together side by side, as if they were old friends. Sarah felt oddly at ease in Sam's company, as if he possessed a quiet wisdom that comforted her. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said last night," Sarah confessed as they walked, "about how it's not what we lose that defines us, but what we choose to do afterward." Sam nodded slowly, looking at the path ahead. "I've lived long enough to know that loss is a part of life. But it's what we do after that defines who we become. And you, Sarah, are in a powerful position. You get to choose how you want to move forward." Sam's words carried a weight that Sarah was still trying to fully absorb, but there was something comforting in the idea that she still had control over her choices, even when everything seemed to have fallen apart. "I just don't know where to start," she said, her voice soft and reflective. Sam looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "Maybe starting is just about taking one step at a time. The important thing is to keep walking." Sam's slow steps beside Sarah set a calm, almost meditative pace to their walk. The biting wind of Bridgetown cut through the air, but Sam's presence warmed something inside Sarah that she still couldn't fully explain. It was as if he had a way of seeing life with a simplicity and depth that made her feel lighter somehow. "Have you ever been through situations like this?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence as they neared a small bridge that crossed a narrow river in the oldest part of the square. Sam chuckled softly, his expression growing serious but serene. "Oh, my dear, I've faced many moments that made me question what I was doing with my life. When I lost my wife, I thought I'd never recover. And during the war, well, there are losses you never really get over." Sarah looked at him, trying to imagine what Sam had been through in his past. The wrinkles on his face told stories she would never fully understand, but there was something in his calm demeanor that touched her deeply. "And how did you manage to keep going?" she asked, genuinely curious. Sam paused for a moment, placing his hands behind his back as he gazed at the small river flowing beneath the bridge. He seemed to choose his words carefully, as if reliving heavy memories. "You don't really move on in the sense of forgetting or completely overcoming it. The loss stays with you. the pain too. But over time you learn to live with it, to take new steps, even while carrying the weight. I always tell myself that as long as I can take one more step, I'm on the right path. Sarah remained silent, reflecting on his words. There was no magical solution, no recipe for moving on after a setback or loss. Life was full of ups and downs, and you had to accept the constant movement. Maybe she didn't need to have all the answers right now. Maybe, as Sam said, it was enough to take one step at a time. "And you?" Sam suddenly asked, turning to her. "What do you want to do now, with this unexpected freedom?" Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. "I still don't know. I've always had a plan, a structure. Being without a job, without a clear path, it's scary. But at the same time, it's also freeing. I'm starting to realize that maybe I was stuck in a life that didn't make me happy." Sam nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. Sometimes the things that feel safe are exactly what keep us trapped. Freedom can be scary, yes, but it's where big changes happen. As they walked, Sarah felt a small spark of hope growing inside her. Maybe instead of mourning what she had lost, she could begin to explore what she could gain from this new phase of life. It was a thought she wasn't used to having, but it was starting to take root. After a few more minutes of walking, Sam glanced up at the sky, noticing the first clouds of rain forming. "I think it's time for me to head home," he said with a gentle smile. "The cold and rain aren't my best friends." Sarah laughed but knew he was right. Winter in Bridgetown could be harsh for someone Sam's age. "I'll walk you home," Sarah offered, feeling genuine concern for the older man. "Oh, you're very kind, but it's just a few blocks from here. I'll be fine," he replied with his usual calm smile. Sarah hesitated, but eventually accepted his refusal. Sam seemed like someone who valued his independence despite his evident frailty. "Thank you for the company, Sam, and for your words. They mean more than you know," she said sincerely. "I should be the one thanking you, Sarah. You've got a good heart. Trust it. It'll guide you in the right direction." They said their goodbyes, and Sarah watched Sam walk down the street, his steps slow but determined. For some reason, watching him disappear around the corner gave her a sense of peace. She knew he carried his own burdens, but there was something comforting in the way he kept walking, always believing that somehow things would turn out fine. When she got home, Sarah sat on the couch, feeling the physical exhaustion of the day, but also a mental clarity she hadn't felt in a while. She still had many questions, still felt lost in some ways, but for the first time in days, she didn't feel defeated. She picked up her phone and decided to call her brother Mark. He was the person she confided in the most, and although they had talked earlier that morning, Sarah felt the need to share what she was feeling. Mark answered quickly, and before he could say anything, Sarah started talking. "You know, Mark, I think you were right. I was stuck in something that didn't make me happy, and now that I've been forced out, I feel like I can breathe again." "I'm always right, aren't I?" Mark replied jokingly, but with an obvious tone of affection. "But seriously, I'm glad you're starting to see that. The world's a big place, Sarah, and there's so much more out there than just following rules and chasing a career that doesn't satisfy you." Sarah smiled. "I know. I think I just needed a push. And who would have thought? That push came in the worst way possible, but maybe it was for the best. Sometimes the best comes from the unexpected. You just have to be open to it." They continued talking, but after hanging up, Sarah already knew what she would do the next day. She didn't have all the details figured out yet, but there was an idea growing in her mind, a new perspective forming. Something that involved helping others, like she had done with Sam. Something that made her feel alive, useful, connected to what really mattered. She didn't have all the answers, but as Sam had said, the important thing was to take one step at a time. The next morning, the winter sun of Bridgetown filtered through the gaps in the curtains of Sarah's apartment, casting a soft and welcoming light across the room. She woke up feeling different, with a lightness in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. There was a renewed energy inside her, as if, for the first time in ages, she was about to do something that truly moved her. After a quick shower and making some coffee, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a notebook in front of her. It was the same notebook she used to jot down work goals and plans. Now, though, it would be used for something much more personal. As ideas began to form in her mind, Sarah recalled Sam's words. "You've already started something today, by helping me." That simple gesture, buying him a burger, had been a small act of kindness, but the impact was immense, and it made her think. How many other people in Bridgetown were going through hard times? How many of them, like Sam, might need a small act of humanity to remind them they weren't alone? Sarah began jotting down her ideas in the notebook, scribbling thoughts about how she could turn her desire to help into something bigger. Maybe she could organize a volunteer group, or even start a campaign to provide hot meals to people in vulnerable situations. The more she wrote, the more excited she became. It gave meaning to everything that had happened. When she finished sketching out her initial ideas, Sarah realized that to truly bring this plan to life, she would need support. She didn't know much about organizing a community campaign or how to get donations, but she knew someone who probably did. Mark. She grabbed the phone and called her brother, who answered with his usual upbeat tone. "Hey, sis, what a surprise. Have you thought about your new life mission yet?" Mark joked, but Sarah could tell he was eager to hear what she had in mind. "Actually, yes," she replied with a smile. "And I think it could work, but I need your help." "Spill it. I'm dying of curiosity," Mark responded, always enthusiastic. Sarah explained her idea of creating a support network for people like Sam, offering hot meals and maybe other types of assistance, like clothing or even a bit of companionship for those living alone. Her plan was to start small, but something that could grow over time and truly make a difference in people's lives. Mark was silent for a few seconds, which was rare, before finally responding. "Sarah, this is amazing. I couldn't be more proud of you. And of course, I'll help with whatever you need. We can make posters, organize events, even try to raise donations. I'll call some friends, artists who love this kind of cause. They can help with creative ideas and might even get personally involved. You know, things that catch the community's attention." Mark's enthusiasm was contagious, and Sarah began to see her ideas turning into something real. She hadn't thought about how artists could get involved, but she knew that Mark's creative support would make all the difference. "Thanks, Mark. I couldn't do this without you," she said, feeling a wave of gratitude for having someone so close and willing to help her turn her ideas into reality. "Oh, sis, you know we're in this together, and besides, I've always believed in the power of kindness. If we can use that to make a difference, then let's go all in." After the call, Sarah felt even more motivated. Her brother had always been a source of inspiration, with his unique way of seeing the world through an artistic and humanitarian lens. Now, more than ever, she knew she had to move forward with this project. It wasn't just about helping Sam, but about finding a deeper purpose, something that gave meaning to her life and the lives of others. In the days that followed, Sarah and Mark began working together. Mark reached out to friends and colleagues from Bridgetown's art scene, and Sarah started researching how to organize a community event. They decided to begin with a simple action: a day of food donations at Central Square. The goal was to provide hot meals for anyone who needed them, while also creating a space where people could connect, share stories, and maybe find some comfort or help. Mark used his artistic skills to create colorful and eye-catching posters, which they spread throughout the city. The event was called Sharing is Caring, and the idea was simple but powerful. Anyone in need could come and get a free meal, no questions asked, no judgment. It was a small step, but for Sarah, it already meant a lot. On the day of the event, the cold still lingered in Bridgetown, but Sarah's heart was warmed by excitement and nerves. She and Mark arrived early at Central Square, where several tables and chairs had been set up with the help of volunteers Mark had gathered. A food truck parked nearby, bringing meals donated by a local restaurant that had been touched by the cause. Despite the cold, the atmosphere was full of life and energy. Sarah walked around the area, helping organize the tables and checking that everything was in order. She didn't know exactly how many people would show up, but she hoped the Bridgetown community would embrace the idea. As the afternoon went on, the first people began to arrive. Some were homeless individuals that Sarah recognized from other days she'd passed through the square. Others were elderly, like Sam, drawn by the promise of a warm meal and perhaps some company. Sarah's heart raced as she saw how the event was attracting so many people. While serving a bowl of soup to an elderly lady, Sarah looked around and felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced in her previous job. It wasn't a promotion, nor the recognition of a boss. It was something much deeper, the feeling that she was making a difference in the lives of people who really needed it. And then, as if destiny were conspiring to complete that moment, Sarah spotted Sam sitting at one of the farther tables. He was wrapped in his worn coat but had a serene smile on his face, as if he knew that this little idea, born from a burger, had turned into something much bigger. Sarah walked over to him with a smile. "You came," she said, sitting down next to him. "Of course I came," Sam replied, his eyes twinkling. "I couldn't miss this. Looks like you really followed through with your idea." Sarah nodded, feeling grateful for his presence there. "I did. And you were right, Sam. It's not what we lose that defines us, but what we choose to do afterward. And I think I'm finally on the right path." Sam smiled, his eyes full of pride and kindness. "I knew you could do it, Sarah. I always knew there was something special about you." They sat there for a moment, watching people interact, eat, and laugh, and Sarah realized that this was the true definition of success. Not the manager title or the promotions she had chased, but the ability to touch people's lives in a meaningful way. There, in that small community event, she felt she had finally found her purpose. As the afternoon progressed, more people began gathering in Bridgetown's Central Square. The Sharing is Caring event was turning into something beyond what Sarah and Mark had imagined. The smell of warm food filled the air, smiles were exchanged between strangers, and a growing sense of community filled Sarah's heart with a quiet, yet profound happiness. Sam, sitting beside Sarah, seemed to be taking it all in with a kind of contentment she was just beginning to understand. He didn't need to say anything, but Sarah felt that his calm, steady presence was a silent form of support. As if, in some way, he knew that the small gesture she made for him days before would be the spark for something bigger. "I think you've found your path," Sam said suddenly, breaking Sarah's thoughts. She looked at him and smiled, nodding slightly. "Maybe. I'm still figuring it out. But I think this is the closest I've ever felt to being at peace with what I'm doing." Sam chuckled lightly, the kind of laugh filled with the wisdom of someone who's lived long enough to know that life rarely goes according to plan. Peace is a good thing to seek, Sarah, and something many of us spend our whole lives without finding. Sarah was touched by that. He was right. The search for peace and purpose was far more important than the traditional success she had always chased. Suddenly, all the pressure to follow a rigid career path seemed irrelevant compared to what was happening there at that moment. People were connecting, helping one another, and that was more meaningful than any promotion she could have received. As she reflected, Mark approached with a broad smile, clearly pleased with how the event was unfolding. "Hey, look at what you've created, Sarah. This is incredible. I think more people showed up than we expected," he said, glancing around proudly. Sarah stood up, hugging her brother, grateful for the unconditional support he always gave her. Even when she doubted herself, Mark was there, reminding her that there was more to life than following a path dictated by society. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mark. Thank you," she said sincerely. Mark shrugged in his laid-back way. I just gave you a little help. You're the one who made it happen." As the two laughed and shared stories about the last few hours of the event, Sarah noticed a different kind of movement near one of the tables. A familiar figure was approaching. Megan Roberts, the manager at McDonald's who had fired her, walked through the square with a curious, though somewhat stiff expression. Her presence took Sarah by surprise. Megan was accompanied by two colleagues and upon spotting Sarah, hesitated for a second but soon came over. "Sarah," Megan began, her voice somewhat formal, "I heard about what you're doing here today. I decided to stop by and see for myself." Sarah took a deep breath. Although she didn't hold a grudge against Megan for the firing, her presence brought back memories of how tough that moment had been. However, instead of letting the tension build, Sarah chose to maintain the calm serenity she had felt since the event began. "I'm glad you came, Megan," Sarah said, trying to sound as welcoming as possible. "We're giving out meals to those in need and trying to create a sense of community." Megan looked around, clearly trying to grasp what was happening. She had always been practical and results-oriented, and to her, an event like this might seem like a detour from the business logic she followed so strictly. However, something about the environment was touching her, and Sarah could see it in her former boss's eyes. This. Megan hesitated, as if carefully choosing her words. This is impressive. It really is. There was a pause as Megan observed the people gathered, the tables full of smiles, laughter, and conversations. The atmosphere was warm, a stark contrast to the controlled, efficient environment of McDonald's. You know, Sarah, when you did what you did that day at the restaurant, I was just... Megan stopped, visibly uncomfortable, admitting something she maybe hadn't fully come to terms with herself. I was just following the rules, but looking at this, I see that maybe there's more to consider than just what's in the company manual. Sarah listened intently. Megan had always been strict and pragmatic, and seeing her there, speaking with sincerity, was something Sarah hadn't expected. But she also knew that Megan wasn't a bad person. Like Sarah, Megan had been shaped by the rules of the corporate world, believing that efficiency was what mattered most. I understand, Sarah said calmly. I spent a lot of time following the rules too, doing what I thought was right on paper. But sometimes, the most important things can't be measured by that. Sometimes you just have to listen to what's inside you. Megan nodded, visibly absorbing those words. It was as if something inside her was starting to shift too. The rigidity that defined her seemed to soften, even if only slightly. I admire what you've done here, Megan finally said, her eyes softening. Maybe I judged you wrong, or rather, maybe I judged what you did wrong. Sarah smiled gently, appreciating Megan's humility and recognizing that. She didn't expect an apology, nor did she need one. What mattered was that today's event had meant something greater, not just for those who came for help, but also for those who came to observe. Thank you for coming, Megan. I'm glad you saw what we're trying to do here. This is just the beginning, Sarah said, filled with hope about the future of the project. Megan glanced around one more time, her hands fidgeting, as if she wanted to say more but didn't know how. Before leaving, she looked at Sarah with something that seemed like respect, a feeling she had never shown before. Good luck, Sarah. I think you're on the right path, Megan said, before turning to leave with her colleagues. As Megan walked away, Sarah took a deep breath, feeling strangely at peace. Her presence there, her reaction, made Sarah realize that the impact of her actions could go far beyond offering food to those in need. She had planted a seed, not only in the hearts of those who received help, but also in those who watched. Mark returned and noticed the change in his sister's expression. Everything okay? He asked, curious. Sarah smiled, feeling a serenity she had never experienced before. Yes, Mark. Everything's okay. More than okay, actually. As the evening wore on, people began leaving, satisfied and grateful for what they had received. Sarah, Mark, and the volunteers started taking down the tables, cleaning up, and chatting about the event's success. Despite the physical effort, Sarah felt renewed, as if what had started that day was only the beginning of something much bigger. As they packed up the last of the things, Sam appeared by Sarah's side once again, holding his worn coat tightly against the chilly evening wind. Sarah, he said, his voice calm and laden with meaning. You did something special here today, something that many people will remember for a long time. Sarah smiled at him, feeling a deep connection to the man who, without intending to, had been the catalyst for all of this. This was just the beginning, Sam. But I think I've finally found what I really want to do. Sam nodded, as if he had known that all along. I always knew you'd find your way. Now you just need to keep walking. As the cold wind swept through Central Square, Sarah, Mark, and the other volunteers slowly said their goodbyes, filled with a sense of accomplishment. The event had exceeded all expectations, not just because of the meals they distributed, but because of the spirit of community that had blossomed among everyone present. Near the end of the afternoon, with the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, Sarah and Mark decided to take one last walk around the square, chatting about the next steps. Sarah's mind buzzed with ideas, but she knew she had to be practical. Keeping this project alive would require more organization and, most importantly, financial planning to ensure they could continue helping people like Sam. I didn't expect this to grow so fast, Sarah said, reflecting as she walked beside her brother. I thought it would be a small event, but it's clear there are many more people who need help. Mark, ever optimistic and full of energy, shrugged with a smile. That just shows how much this initiative is needed, Sarah. People want to help, and others need to be helped. You're in the middle of it, creating this bridge. Now it's just a matter of figuring out how to expand. Yeah, but to expand we'll need more resources. I have no idea how to secure that consistently. Today was possible because a local restaurant donated the food, but we need to think of something sustainable, Sarah responded with a hint of concern. Mark, always creative, fell silent for a few seconds, clearly pondering the best approach. You know what I think would be interesting? Getting the community more involved. Not just as volunteers, but as partners. The restaurant that helped us today could become a regular supporter, and I bet with the right visibility, other local businesses would join in too. You just need to find a way to engage these people and show them the real impact of what they're doing. Sarah stopped, looking at her brother, realizing he was right. There was more that could be done, something that went beyond organizing occasional events. If she could involve more of the local community, not just volunteers, but also businesses and individuals willing to contribute financially or with resources, the project could become something much larger. You're right, Mark, she said, a new spark of determination in her eyes. If we can get the community's support, we can truly grow. Maybe it's time to turn this into something more structured. Mark grinned, pleased to see his sister so engaged and motivated. Exactly. Think about how this could become an ongoing social impact project. An organization that operates in Bridgetown, helping people every day, not just during events. I bet there are plenty of businesses out there that would love to associate their names with a cause like this. The idea of turning sharing is caring into something bigger began to take root in Sarah's mind. She remembered stories she had read about NGOs and community projects that started small, but, with the community's support, grew and changed lives permanently. Sarah didn't know if she was ready for something so big, but the desire to do more for the city drove her forward. And the best part, Mark continued, his head already full of ideas, is that you're not alone. There are plenty of people willing to help. I, for example, can guarantee a network of artists who would be up for doing fundraisers, exhibits, concerts, you name it. I know the right people. Sarah laughed. Her brother always had these wild ideas, but somehow they made sense. He always managed to rally people around causes he believed in, and this time would be no different. That would be great, Mark. We can start small, like we did today, and grow gradually. I feel like this is the right path, Sarah said, a sense of certainty washing over her. As they walked toward the edge of the square, a small voice came from behind them. When Sarah turned, she saw a middle-aged woman approaching with a timid smile. Her eyes were filled with a mix of gratitude and surprise. "Are you Sarah?" the woman asked, visibly emotional. "I just wanted to thank you for today. Getting a meal here made a huge difference for me and my kids." Sarah was taken aback for a moment. She hadn't expected anyone to approach her directly to say thank you. She smiled gently, extending her hand to the woman. "I'm glad it helped. That's what we're here for," Sarah replied, genuinely moved. "It wasn't just the food," the woman continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "It was the gesture, you know? It's been a long time since I felt like anyone cared. Sometimes all you need is a little bit of hope, and you gave us that today." The woman's words deeply touched Sarah. She knew she was helping by providing meals, but hearing that her initiative had restored hope to people made all the effort feel even more worthwhile. "That means so much to me," Sarah said, holding the woman's hands. "I really hope to keep doing this for more people, and who knows, maybe do even more." The woman nodded, still emotional, and bid farewell with one last thank you. As she walked away, Sarah stood still for a moment, absorbing what she had just heard. "See?" Mark said softly. "This is much bigger than you think. You're touching lives, Sarah, and this is just the beginning." Sarah knew he was right. This was bigger than her, bigger than just a community event. Suddenly, the idea of turning sharing is caring into a real organization didn't just seem possible, it seemed necessary. "I'm going to do it," she said with renewed certainty. I'm going to find a way to formalize this. Maybe create an NGO, seek community support, whatever it takes. If I can keep helping people like Sam and this woman, I'll do whatever it takes." Mark beamed, grinning from ear to ear, proud of his sister. "Now you're speaking my language. Count on me for whatever you need. And I bet before long there will be a line of people wanting to get involved." That night, Sarah returned to her apartment with renewed energy. She sat down at her table, opened her notebook again, and began sketching plans to turn sharing is caring into something permanent. She was determined to do whatever it took to gain support, mobilize people, and ensure the initiative continued. As she wrote, she felt that for the first time, she was creating something that truly made sense to her. The feeling of being in control of her own life while helping others at the same time was deeply gratifying. The next morning, Sarah woke up early, feeling a mix of anxiety and excitement. The notes she had made the night before were scattered across the table, and she knew that this was the first step of a long journey. Sharing is caring could become much more than just an occasional event, and now Sarah was determined to make it a concrete reality. As she made her coffee, her phone rang. It was Mark. "Good morning, sis." His voice was as upbeat as ever. "Ready for a day full of new ideas? I've got some contacts who can help us formalize your NGO idea." Sarah smiled, already knowing her brother wouldn't waste any time. He was always the kind of person who, once involved in a project, gave it his all. "I'm ready," Sarah replied. "But I'm a bit nervous. I've never organized something like this. Formalizing an NGO, getting businesses involved, seeking support, it's a lot more complicated than I thought." Mark, ever the encourager, laughed. "I know it seems big, but remember one thing, you've already started, and the hardest part is often taking that first step. Now it's just about building on what you're already doing, and I'll help with whatever you need." Feeling a bit more confident, Sarah jotted down a few notes as Mark talked about the contacts he had secured. He suggested they begin by seeking legal advice to formalize the organization and then launch a campaign to engage more people and local businesses. "I know a lawyer who works with social causes," Mark said. "She can guide us through the first steps of creating an NGO. How about we meet her this afternoon?" Sarah nodded, already planning out the next steps in her mind. What once seemed like a distant dream was now beginning to take shape. She didn't have all the answers, but with her brother's help and the right people, she knew she could make it work. That afternoon, Sarah and Mark met with Emily Robertson, a lawyer specializing in social justice, who, like them, was passionate about community causes. She worked out of a small office in downtown Bridgetown and had a practical, no-nonsense approach, something Sarah appreciated right away. "I'm glad to see you're willing to make a difference," Emily said after hearing their plan. Formalizing an NGO is a bureaucratic process, but nothing impossible. What you need is a basic structure, a charter, a board of directors, and of course, funding to keep the organization running. I can help you with the legal side, guiding you through the necessary documents and regulations. Sarah felt relieved to know they would have the guidance of someone experienced. And as Emily explained the legalities, Sarah began to visualize how to structure the project. It would be necessary to build a committed team and seek partners who could ensure the organization's sustainability. "And what about funds?" Sarah asked, knowing this would be one of the biggest challenges. "How can we start raising money to keep things going?" Emily smiled, as if she had been expecting that question. "There are several ways. You can start with individual donations while also seeking sponsorships from local businesses. These days, many companies want to align their brands with. You already have an inspiring story, and that can be leveraged to engage potential partners. Plus, fundraising events are a great strategy. Concerts, exhibitions, markets. Mark can help with that part, right?" Mark nodded enthusiastically, already thinking about ways to involve the artistic community. "I'm already brainstorming events. We could do a collective art exhibition and donate part of the sales to the NGO, or even organize benefit concerts. Plenty of local talent would love to get involved." With Emily's legal support and Mark's enthusiasm for organizing events, the project was starting to seem much more feasible. Of course, there would still be challenges ahead, but with such an engaged team, she knew it was possible. "I think you're on the right track," Emily said as she wrapped up her advice. The most important thing now is to formalize the NGO and secure community support. Once that's in place, the rest will follow. Sarah and Mark left Emily's office with a clear list of tasks for the coming days. The project was officially underway, and Sarah felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. "This is bigger than I imagined," Sarah admitted as they walked home. "But I'm ready. I don't think I've ever been so determined to make something work." Mark smiled, throwing an arm around his sister's shoulders. "And it will work, Sarah. I'm sure of it. You're following what really matters to you. And that's what makes all the difference." In the days that followed, Sarah and Mark threw themselves into the project. With Emily's legal support, they began organizing the necessary documents to formalize the NGO. Meanwhile, Mark met with local artists, planning fundraising events. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction, but as expected, challenges started to arise. Securing financial support from local businesses wasn't as simple as Sarah had hoped. Many were willing to help, but others hesitated, and Sarah realized she would need a more sophisticated strategy to convince them to invest in the project. She and Mark began planning formal presentations, explaining the impact sharing is caring was already having on Bridgetown, and how, with the right support, they could do even more. In one of these meetings, Sarah found herself sitting across from Tom Harris, a manager at a local supermarket chain. He listened attentively to her presentation. "I understand the importance of the cause," Tom said after hearing Sarah's plan. "But we need to be sure this kind of project is sustainable in the long term. We've seen many initiatives start with good intentions but fail to stay afloat. What you're doing is admirable, but for us to commit to sponsorship, we need to be confident that the project will continue growing." Sarah knew this would be a concern for many businesses. Sustainability was the key word. Companies didn't just want to be associated with temporary causes. They wanted to see lasting, impactful results. "I completely understand," Sarah replied, keeping her composure. "That's exactly why we're building something structured. Our intention isn't just to hold one-off events, but to create a solid organization that provides continuous support to the community. The initial event was just the first step. We want to expand our services, offering not just meals but clothing, psychological support, and eventually even courses and job opportunities for people in vulnerable situations." Tom looked at her for a few moments, evaluating the seriousness of her proposal. "If you can rally the community and show concrete results over the next few months, we can discuss a longer-term partnership. For now, what I can offer is support for your upcoming events, providing groceries for the meals." Sarah smiled, satisfied with that first step. It wasn't long-term sponsorship, but it was something, and she knew that every small victory counted. "Thank you, Tom. That will be a huge help," she said, standing up to say goodbye. As she left the meeting, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but with each new connection, each new step forward, she was bringing her vision to life. That night, back in her apartment, Sarah sat once again at the kitchen table, reorganizing the notes and plans she had made. Despite the challenges, she felt an inner peace. The sense of purpose, of doing something that truly mattered, grew stronger with each passing day. Her phone rang, and seeing Sam's name on the screen, Sarah smiled. She answered immediately. "Sam, how are you?" Sam's voice, always calm and filled with wisdom, came through the line. "I'm doing well, Sarah. But I wanted to know how you are. It seems like things are growing fast." Sarah laughed, feeling more relaxed hearing her friend's familiar voice. "They are, Sam. It's been more challenging than I expected, but everything's going well. I'm getting support from the community and we're moving forward with formalizing the project." Sam was quiet for a moment before speaking. "I'm happy for you, Sarah. Really happy. I knew you'd find your path." Sarah smiled, grateful for having this man in her life. "Thank you, Sam. None of this would have started without you." From the other end, Sarah could sense Sam's smile. "I was just the spark. You're the fire." They said their goodbyes, and Sarah sat for a moment, staring at the phone, reflecting on how far she had come since that first encounter with Sam. The world around her had changed, but what amazed her most was how much she had changed herself. In the weeks that followed, Sharing is Caring began transforming into something far beyond Sarah's original dreams. The small community initiative was taking shape, growing daily, and more people were getting involved. Local businesses started offering consistent support. Volunteers rallied behind the cause, and even the fundraising events organized by Mark were gaining momentum. Sarah worked tirelessly, splitting her time between meetings with supporters, organizing events, and working in the... She barely had time to think about herself, but for the first time, that didn't bother her. The feeling of doing something meaningful outweighed any exhaustion. One afternoon, as Sarah oversaw a delivery of supplies at Central Square, Sam appeared, as he often did. He approached slowly, the cold already settling in the air, but with that serene smile he always carried. Seeing him, Sarah's heart warmed, knowing that he was an essential part of all of this. "Sarah, I couldn't be prouder of what you've done here," Sam said, approaching and taking in the bustling activity around them. "When we first met, I never imagined a simple burger would spark something so big." Sarah smiled, touched. Sam had become a silent mentor for her, always present even without needing to say much. "I wouldn't have done this without you, Sam. That day, I just followed my heart. But afterward I realized this was what I needed, to connect with people and do something that really matters." Sam nodded, looking around with admiration. "You know, Sarah, the world needs more people like you. People willing to listen to their hearts, even when everything around them says to follow the rules. You found a balance between the two, and that's rare." Before Sarah could respond, Mark bounded over with his usual infectious energy, bringing good news. "Sarah, remember the craft beverage company I mentioned? They've agreed to partner with us for the next 3 events. That means more funds for the project, more supplies, and most importantly, more people engaged." Sarah felt a wave of relief and joy. Every new partnership was a step forward in realizing the project, and Mark was always at the forefront, ensuring the right doors opened. "That's amazing, Mark," Sarah said, hugging her brother. "With this support, we'll be able to expand the distribution and help even more people. We might even start offering those courses we've been planning." Sam, who had been quietly observing, smiled approvingly. "I knew things would grow. When work is done with heart, it flourishes no matter what." As time passed, sharing is caring was no longer just an idea on paper. It became a formally established NGO with a volunteer network that spanned all of Bridgetown. Sarah, Mark, and the others involved organized more events, expanded meal distribution to different neighborhoods, and began offering basic courses for people in vulnerable situations. Slowly, they were building not just a relief program, but a real community of support. One day, Sarah received an unexpected call from Megan, her former boss at McDonald's. The call surprised her, as Megan had distanced herself since the initial event. "Sarah, it's Megan. I was wondering, could we talk?" Megan's. Sarah paused for a moment, caught off guard, but responded with her usual kindness. "Of course, Megan. Where would you like to meet? How about the square where you started the project? It seems like a fitting place." Sarah agreed, and later that afternoon, she went to Central Square. When she arrived, she saw Megan already sitting on one of the benches, waiting. The cold gave the square a serene atmosphere, and the silence between them felt heavy at first. "Thank you for coming," Megan began, her tone a mix of sincerity and nerves. "I just wanted to say that what you've done and what you're doing with Sharing is Caring has made me rethink a lot of things." Sarah, surprised by Megan's vulnerability, stayed quiet, listening. "When I fired you, I was so focused on following the company's rules that I couldn't see beyond them. But seeing what you've built, it's shown me that there's more to life than just following the manual. You did something I never had the courage to do. You followed your heart, even when it meant losing something important to you." Megan paused, taking a deep breath. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry, and if I can help in any way, I'd like to be involved in the project." Megan's words took Sarah by surprise. She never imagined that her former boss, so rigid and rule-bound, could be moved by what she had created. But here was Megan, proving that even the most inflexible people can change. Sarah smiled, feeling a genuine sense of relief. "Thank you, Megan. I know it hasn't always been easy, and I'd be happy to have your help. The more people involved, the more we can do." The two of them talked for a while longer, and when Megan left, Sarah felt that an old wound had finally healed. The cycle was complete. What began with a dismissal now brought renewed connection. Over time, the impact of sharing is caring continued to grow. The project gained recognition across the country, inspiring similar initiatives. What had once been a small act of kindness had evolved into something far greater than Sarah could have ever imagined. Sam remained a constant presence, attending meetings and events, offering his quiet wisdom and steady support. Mark, meanwhile, had become a central figure in organizing events, bringing in more artists and businesses to support the cause. And Sarah, now the leader of an organization that touched so many lives, finally felt at peace. It wasn't the kind of success she had envisioned when she started her career at McDonald's, but it was something much more meaningful. She had found her true purpose. One day, after another successful fundraising event, Sam approached Sarah and pulled her aside for a private conversation. He seemed more serious than usual, though his tranquil gaze still comforted her. "Sarah, there's something I want to tell you," he began, pausing to choose his words carefully. "You changed my life that day you gave me that burger. But more than that, you gave me hope. And that's something very few people can offer." Sarah, moved, looked at Sam, feeling her gratitude for him grow even deeper. "Sam, you're the one who gave me the path. I just followed the opportunities that came after that day." Sam smiled, his eyes shining with the warmth Sarah had come to know so well. "What matters is that you made the right choice, and I'm so happy to have been part of this journey." They embraced, and Sarah felt a deep emotion wash over her. In that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. Every step, every hardship, every gesture, it had all led her to this. And at that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what happened next, she would keep moving forward. Because, as Sam had said so many times, what mattered wasn't what we lose, but what we do afterward. She had found her purpose, and now she was determined to keep going, helping those who, like Sam, needed a second chance. 5 years had passed since that first act of kindness that would change Sarah's life and the lives of so many others. Bridgetown, once just another city on the map, was now known as a symbol of solidarity and empathy, thanks to the ongoing impact of sharing is caring. The small NGO that had started with meals handed out in a square had transformed into a robust support network with multiple centers across the city. In addition to food, the organization now provided psychological assistance, job reintegration programs, and skill-building courses, helping vulnerable people restart their lives with dignity. Sarah, now 29, was a respected figure not only in Bridgetown but in neighboring cities where similar initiatives had begun to flourish, inspired by the original project. Her name became synonymous with the fight for a more compassionate world, though she always refused to take all the credit. That afternoon, Sarah walked through the courtyard of the largest Sharing is Caring center, located in a former warehouse transformed into a community hub. The building's facade displayed a huge mural painted by local artists, organized by Mark, who had become the director of events, always finding new ways to merge art with social action. The mural, filled with vibrant colors and figures representing the diversity of lives touched by the NGO, symbolized the hope that Sarah and her team had spread throughout the city. As she entered the center, she was greeted with warm hugs from volunteers, staff, and beneficiaries. The space was buzzing with activity, people helping others, the smell of fresh food, the sounds of laughter and conversations. Sarah walked through the halls where both young and older people were learning new skills in sewing, computer, and cooking workshops. In her office, Sarah sat at her desk and gazed out the window, reflecting on all they had achieved. Sometimes, she still found herself thinking about that first day, the small gesture that had changed everything. She thought of Sam, the man she had helped when he walked into McDonald's seeking shelter from the cold. Sam had become a close friend, a quiet mentor. Sadly, he had passed away 2 years earlier, but his memory lived on in everything Sarah did. In the main courtyard, a bronze plaque honored Sam's memory, inscribed with the words, "For Sam Harris, who taught us that a small gesture can change the world." Sam had never lived to see the full extent of the impact he had on so many lives, but Sarah always said that everything she did was in his honor. Sharing is Caring grew because Sam believed in her, and that belief was the spark that ignited the movement that transformed Bridgetown. Mark walked into the room with a smile, breaking Sarah's thoughts. "We've got another partnership confirmed," he announced, waving a folder full of documents. "We're going to expand to 2 more cities. This is getting huge, Sarah." She smiled, feeling the pride swell within her. With every new step, it became clearer that the project had a bright future. "I always knew we could do it, Mark, and we're still just getting started." They laughed, feeling that familiar, renewed energy of knowing they were on the right path. Sarah looked out at the mural in the courtyard, grateful for having found her true mission in life. The young woman who once felt lost, stuck in a job that didn't bring her joy, had transformed into someone who not only found purpose, but spread hope to thousands of people. She knew the road ahead would bring new challenges, but as she always reminded herself, the important thing is to keep walking. And that's exactly what she did, alongside her brother, her team, and an entire community that had learned that together they could change the world. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories almost every day. And now you can click on the links appearing on the screen, because there are many more incredible stories waiting for you.